The day I moved into Sycamore Glen, I got a notice before I finished unpacking the first box. It was slid under the front door of my new house at 11 in the morning on a Saturday in June. I had been in the house for approximately 4 hours. The moving truck was still in the driveway. My coffee maker was still in a box in the kitchen. I found the notice because I nearly stepped on it carrying a lamp through the front hallway. The notice was printed on cream-colored paper with an embossed letterhead that said Sycamore Glen Homeowners Association in a font that took itself very seriously. Below that, it said Official Notice of Violation, and below that, it listed 2 specific violations. The first was that my moving truck was parked on the street rather than in the driveway. The second was that several boxes visible through my open front door appeared to be stacked in a way that might be observable from the street, which was a violation of the Community's Visual Standards Policy Section 4, subsection C. I stood in my hallway holding a lamp and reading this notice, and I felt something shift in my chest that I would later understand was the first indicator that the next 3 years of my life were going to be something I had not expected when I signed the purchase agreement for this house. My name is Nora Bellamy. I am 28 years old. I have red hair that people have been commenting on since I was approximately 2 days old, and blue eyes and pale skin that burns in June in approximately 7 minutes. I grew up in Cincinnati. I bought this house in Millhaven, Virginia, with the money I inherited from my grandfather Chester, who had spent 40 years building a contracting business and who left me enough to make a down payment on a 3-bedroom house in a neighborhood with good schools. I did not have children. I was not married. I was a civil engineer who worked from home for a firm based in Richmond and who needed good internet access and a quiet place to work and a neighborhood that felt safe when I ran in the mornings. The neighborhood was the last thing on my list. I should have moved it to the first. I read the notice a second time. I went back outside to the moving truck. I told the movers to please pull into the driveway. They looked at me. The driveway was not quite big enough for the truck. I said, "Please try." The driver tried. The back corner of the truck ended up approximately 8 inches over the property line into the neighbor's grass. The neighbor appeared in her front yard within 45 seconds. Her name was Linda Foss. She was 59 years old and she had lived in Sycamore Glen for 18 years, and she was on the HOA board, and she had, I would discover, opinions about everything that occurred within visual range of her property. She stood at the edge of her yard with her arms crossed, looking at the back corner of the moving truck, and then looking at me with an expression that contained an entire thesis about my inadequacy as a neighbor. I said I was so sorry about the truck. We were just trying to comply with the street parking notice. We would get it moved as soon as possible. She said the driveway at this property was not designed for commercial vehicles, and that I should have arranged the move more carefully to avoid exactly this situation. She said she hoped this wasn't going to be indicative of how things were going to go. She said Sycamore Glen was a community with standards, and those standards existed for a reason. I said I completely understood and I was very sorry, and I would get the truck moved immediately. She went back inside. The driver moved the truck back to the street. I went inside my half-unpacked house, and I sat on the floor in the living room between 2 boxes, and I thought about Chester and whether this was what he had envisioned when he left me the down payment money, and I decided he had not specifically envisioned this, and that he would have found it funny, and that the memory of what he would have found funny was going to have to carry me through what I already suspected was coming. Chester always said that the most dangerous people in any situation were the ones who had made a small amount of power the organizing principle of their entire identity. He said, watch out for those people. He said they were like the load-bearing walls in a building. Remove the thing that's holding them up, and the whole structure comes down. He said the trick was never to threaten the load-bearing wall directly. He said work around it. He said there were always ways around. I did not know yet how much I was going to need that advice. The Sycamore Glen HOA had been established when the neighborhood was built 22 years ago. The original founders had designed it with the best intentions of people who have never fully reckoned with what it means to give a small group of neighbors authority over their neighbors' daily choices. The founding documents were thorough and specific, and covered everything from lawn height to mailbox specifications to the approved color palette for exterior paint. The board had 5 members. Linda Foss was the president. She had been the president for 9 consecutive years, which was technically a violation of the bylaws that limited terms to 3 years. but which nobody had successfully challenged because challenging Linda Foss required a level of organizational persistence that most people found too costly. The other board members were Gerald Marsh, who had been on the board for 6 years and who voted with Linda on everything, and whose main interest appeared to be the enforcement of parking regulations. Then there was Diane Poley, who had joined 2 years prior and who seemed genuinely interested in community improvement, but who had been so thoroughly worn down by Linda that she rarely spoke at meetings anymore. And there was Arthur Finch, who was 81 years old and who attended meetings but had not spoken at one in approximately 4 years. And there was a rotating 5th seat that was theoretically filled by a neighborhood election, but which had been vacant for 3 cycles because nobody ran. I learned all of this from my neighbor on the other side, a woman named Rosa Gutierrez, who had lived in Sycamore Glen for 11 years, and who knocked on my door 3 days after I moved, in with a bottle of wine and what she described as an urgent briefing. Rosa sat at my kitchen table and told me things with the brisk efficiency of a person who has been waiting a long time to tell someone things to. She told me about Linda. She told me about the notices. She told me about the neighbor on Birchwood Lane who had painted his shutters a blue that was not on the approved palette and had spent 8 months in a dispute that ended with him repainting and moving away within a year. She told me about the woman on Maple Court who had planted a vegetable garden visible from the street, which was technically permitted under the bylaws, but which Linda had found a way to make untenable through a series of escalating interpretations of the visual standards policy. She told me about the empty 5th seat. She said 3 people had tried to run for it over the past 2 cycles, and all 3 had been deterred by what she described as the process, which was Linda's method of making the nomination and election process so administratively burdensome that most people gave up before completing it. I poured myself more wine. I asked Rosa if anyone had ever successfully challenged anything Linda had done. Rosa thought about it. She said once, 5 years ago. A man named David Park had raised a procedural objection at a meeting that had technically required Linda to delay an enforcement action for 30 days. She said Linda had made his life very difficult for the following 6 months. She said he sold the house and moved. I said, so Linda has never actually lost anything, Rosa said, not that she could recall. She said Linda was very good at identifying what people were willing to tolerate and then operating just below that threshold. She said the problem was that what most people were willing to tolerate was quite a lot because they had jobs and families and lives, and they could not devote significant energy to a neighborhood dispute. I said, what about you? Rosa smiled and said she had learned to keep her head down and her lawn at the right height and her mailbox within specification, and her opinions to herself in the presence of Linda Foss. She said it was not heroic, but it was survivable. I said I understood. I said thank you for telling me. She said she hoped I would keep a low profile. She said Sycamore Glen was actually a lovely neighborhood when the HOA wasn't actively making things unpleasant. I said I would do my best. I already knew that was not going to be entirely true. The second notice arrived 12 days after the first. My front porch light had burned out, and I had not replaced the bulb within the 72-hour window specified in Section 7 of the Community Standards for Exterior Lighting. The notice included a reference to the specific bylaw and a reminder that continued violations could result in fines. I replaced the bulb the same day I received the notice. I also read the entire HOA governing document, which was 47 pages long, and which I printed out and highlighted and indexed with color-coded tabs, because I am a civil engineer and this is how I process information. I learned several things from that document. The first was that the governing documents were genuinely comprehensive and had been drafted by someone who knew what they were doing legally. The second was that they were not entirely consistent internally, which is the kind of thing that most people do not notice, but that a person trained to read technical specifications notices immediately. The third was that the election process for board members was spelled out in detail, and while it had been made administratively complex, it was not actually impossible to navigate if you were methodical about it. I also learned something that Linda either did not know or had chosen not to act on. The bylaw specified that any homeowner could request a copy of all HOA financial records, meeting minutes, and correspondence within 30 days. The bylaws also specified that the board was required to hold a minimum of 4 meetings per year with advance notice to all homeowners, and that homeowners had the right to attend and to speak for up to 3 minutes on any agenda item. I had not attended a board meeting yet. I started going to the next one. The July board meeting was held in the common room of the Neighborhood Recreation Center on the last Tuesday of the month at 7 in the evening. I arrived at 6:50. There were 9 other homeowners there, besides the 5 board members. Rosa had told me attendance was usually low. She had also said she would not be coming because she valued her peace of mind. Linda Foss ran the meeting with the precise efficiency of someone who has run the same meeting for 9 years and who has optimized it to minimize interruption and maximize her own ability to control outcomes. She called the meeting to order at exactly 7. She moved through agenda items with practiced speed: approval of previous minutes, financial report, maintenance updates, new business. I waited until new business. When Linda asked if there was any new business, I raised my hand. She looked at me for a moment. The pause was brief, but it was there. Then she said yes, and I said I had a question about the interpretation of Section 4, subsection C of the Visual Standards Policy, specifically regarding what qualified as observable from the street. Linda said the board's interpretation had been clearly communicated in the enforcement notices, and she did not think the meeting was the appropriate venue for individual compliance questions. I said I understood, but I was asking as a matter of general policy clarification for all homeowners, not specifically about my situation. I said I had noticed some inconsistency in how the standard had been applied across different properties, and I thought some clarification might be helpful for the community. Linda said the board was satisfied with the current interpretation and would take my concerns under advisement. I said, "Thank you." I sat down. I said nothing else that evening. On the way out, Gerald Marsh stopped me in the parking lot. He said he appreciated that I had raised my concern politely. He said some new homeowners came in with a chip on their shoulder. He said it was refreshing to see someone who understood how the process worked. I said I was still learning. He said that was the right attitude. He said Linda was tough but fair, and that once you understood how things worked here, you would find it was a well-run community. I said I was looking forward to understanding it better. I went home and I made notes. I had been making notes since the first notice. A document on my laptop that recorded each interaction with the HOA, the date, the content, and any relevant bylaw citations. I added the July meeting. I also started requesting records, financial statements for the past 3 years, meeting minutes going back to the founding, all correspondence sent by the board to homeowners on file. I submitted the requests in writing by certified mail. The bylaws required a response within 30 days. The response came in 28 days. Most of the records were provided. Some were not. The financial statements for the past 2 years were provided, but the statements for the year before that were described as unavailable due to a records management transition. The minutes for a specific set of meetings 18 months prior were similarly described as unavailable. I found that interesting. I made a note. My 3rd notice arrived in August. My grass had reached 3 3/4 inches in one section of the front lawn, which exceeded the 3-inch maximum specified in the community standards. I had been traveling for work for 11 days. The grass had grown while I was gone. I hired a lawn service the following week. Rosa came over that evening. She said she had seen the notice slip under my door, and she wanted to check on me. I said I was fine. She said the grass thing was one of Linda's favorites. She said once you had a lawn service on a schedule, you were generally safe, but that Linda had been known to measure grass with an actual ruler. I said, had Linda measured my grass with a ruler? Rosa said she didn't know for certain, but she wouldn't rule it out. I said I had been requesting records. Rosa got quiet. She said, what kind of records? I said financial records and meeting minutes and board correspondence. Rosa was quiet for another moment. She said, be careful. I said I was being careful. She said I meant it. She said Linda had responded badly to that kind of thing in the past. I said, what had she done? Rosa said she had found ways to make things uncomfortable for the people who were asking. More notices. More aggressive interpretation of ambiguous standards. Finding things to cite that had not previously been cited. She said it was not technically retaliation, but it felt like it. I said that was useful to know. Rosa said she was not trying to discourage me. She said she was not sure what I was doing, but she had a feeling it was something and she wanted me to be careful. I said thank you. I said I appreciated her. She stood up to leave. Then she turned around and said, "Actually, I want to know what you're doing." I said I was reading the governing documents very carefully and requesting the records I was entitled to and attending the board meetings and generally trying to understand how the community functioned. Rosa looked at me for a moment. She said, "That doesn't sound like much." I said it was a start. She sat back down. She said, "Okay." She said, "Tell me what you found." I told her about the inconsistencies in the governing documents. I told her about the missing financial records. I told her about the election process for the vacant 5th seat. I told her about the term limit provision that Linda had been exceeding for 6 years. Rosa listened to all of it. She said, "So, what does it mean?" I said it meant there were questions worth asking in a venue where they had to be answered. She said, "What venue?" I said a properly noticed homeowner meeting with a quorum present had the right to call for a formal review of board compliance with the governing documents. Rosa was quiet. Then she said, "How many homeowners did we need for a quorum?" I said the bylaws specified 15% of homeowners in good standing. Sycamore Glen had 112 households. 15% was 17 homeowners. Rosa said, "Could we get 17 homeowners to come to a meeting?" I said I thought so if we asked the right people in the right way. Rosa said, "What's the right way?" I said in writing, by hand. Delivered personally. Not by email, because email was too easy to ignore and too easy to dismiss as not serious. I said I wanted to talk to people at their doors. I said I wanted them to see a real person asking for something specific. Rosa said she would help. I said I was counting on it. We spent the next 6 weeks knocking on doors. Not all the doors. I had been specific about which ones. The financial records I had received showed that 17 properties had received more than 3 enforcement notices in the past 2 years. I started with those homeowners. They had concrete experience of what I was describing. They did not need to be convinced that there was a problem. They needed to be convinced that something could be done about it. The first 10 conversations were educational. I learned that the frustration was widespread, but the belief that anything could change was minimal. People had internalized Linda's invulnerability. They had been told through years of unsuccessful complaint that the HOA was what it was, and that the cost of fighting it exceeded the benefit. I learned to change my approach. Instead of describing what I had found in the governing documents, I started by asking people what they wished were different. I let them talk. I listened. Then I said, I think there's a path to addressing some of that, and I wanted to tell them about it. I said it would require showing up to one meeting. I said I needed people to sign a petition requesting a formal homeowner meeting under Section 14 of the bylaws. Section 14. That was the key. Section 14 gave any group of homeowners representing 15% of the community the right to call a special meeting that the board was required to hold within 60 days, and at which homeowners had full speaking and voting rights on any matter related to board governance. The petition had to be submitted in writing. It had to contain the signatures and addresses of the requesting homeowners. It had to specify the agenda items to be addressed. I drafted it carefully. I had a civil engineering colleague who was also a notary review it. The language was precise and referenced the specific bylaw provisions. It did not editorialize. It simply requested the meeting and listed the agenda items in neutral terms. The agenda items were 4. The first was a request for full financial disclosure for the missing period. The second was a discussion of board compliance with the term limit provisions. The third was a discussion of the interpretation standards for Section 4, subsection C. The fourth was the opening of the 5th board seat for election. By the 6th week, we had 23 signatures. More than enough. I submitted the petition by certified mail on a Thursday morning in October. I tracked the delivery. It was received and signed for at 11:47 the same morning. Then I waited. Linda called me that afternoon. I knew she would call. I had been expecting it and I had prepared for it. She said she had received the petition. She said she wanted to discuss it. I said I was happy to discuss it. She said, could I come by her house? I said I was also happy to talk by phone or email if that was more convenient. She said she preferred in person. I said I would come by at 6 if that worked. She said 6 was fine. Linda's house was the largest in Sycamore Glen. She had lived in it for 18 years, and it showed the particular care of someone who cared very much about the visible condition of her property. The lawn was precise. The mulch was even. The exterior paint was the exact approved palette shade of colonial cream. She opened the door before I knocked. She was wearing a blazer. At 6 in the evening at home, she was wearing a blazer. I thought about Chester and what he would have said about that. She brought me to her kitchen table. She had made coffee. She offered me a cup. I said, "Yes, thank you." She sat across from me and she looked at me for a moment, and I looked back and I waited. She said she appreciated that I had approached this through proper channels. She said she could see I was someone who took the governing documents seriously. She said she also wanted to be honest with me, that the petition had raised some concerns on the board. I said I was glad it had given the board something to think about. She said some of the agenda items touched on sensitive areas. She said the financial records matter was being addressed and would be resolved through the normal process. She said the term limit question was something the board had discussed internally and had a legal opinion about. She said she was confident a meeting would show that everything was in order. I said then I looked forward to the meeting. She said of course. She said but she wanted to offer me something first. She said the 5th board seat was going to be open for election anyway. She'd been meaning to address that, and she thought I might be a good candidate. She said someone with my attention to detail and my interest in the governing documents would be a real asset on the board. She said she would be happy to support my candidacy. I looked at her. She looked back at me. The coffee was good. I took a sip. I said I appreciated the thought. I said I was definitely interested in community involvement. I said I did want to make sure the special meeting happened first because I thought the process of addressing those specific agenda items was important for the community to go through together. I said I hoped she agreed that transparency was in everyone's interest. She looked at me for a moment. She said of course she agreed. She said she just wanted to make sure I understood that the process could be collaborative rather than adversarial. I said I completely agreed, and I had no interest in being adversarial. I said I just wanted the meeting. She said the meeting would happen. She said 60 days from receipt of the petition. She said she looked forward to the community coming together. I said me too. I said the coffee was wonderful. I said thank you for having me. I drove home. I sat in my car in the driveway for a few minutes. Chester, I thought, load-bearing wall. You don't knock it over. You work around it. You find the other walls that are holding things up, and you make sure those ones are solid. The petition was solid. The bylaws were solid. The 23 signatures were solid. The special meeting was going to happen. The special meeting was scheduled for December 9th. Linda had chosen the date carefully. The week before the holiday party season began in earnest. She may have calculated that attendance would be low. She was wrong. Rosa and I had spent the 6 weeks between the petition and the meeting doing the same thing we had done to collect signatures, door-to-door, personal conversations, specific information. I told people the date. I told them what would be discussed. I told them that their presence mattered, and here was specifically why. 51 homeowners attended the December 9th meeting. 45% of the community. The common room was full. Linda walked in and saw 51 people in chairs, and I watched her face do the rapid recalibration of someone encountering something she had not prepared for. She called the meeting to order at 7. She was professional about it. I will give her that. Whatever she was feeling, she did not show it in her face or her voice. She moved through the procedural requirements. She acknowledged the petition and the agenda items. Then she said she had a few preliminary remarks. She said the board wanted to address the concerns raised in the petition directly and transparently. She said she had documents for everyone, and Gerald Marsh began distributing packets around the room. The packets contained the missing financial records, complete. For the full 3-year period that had previously been described as unavailable due to a records management transition. The records showed no financial irregularities. The money was all accounted for. The reason they had not been provided initially was never explained. Linda said she also wanted to address the term limit question. She said the board had obtained a legal opinion. She said the legal opinion found that the term limits in the governing documents were not mandatory but advisory due to specific language in the founding amendment. She said the board therefore believed Linda's continued service was legally defensible. I raised my hand. Linda called on me. I said I had read the legal opinion she was referencing, and I had also had the governing documents reviewed by a Virginia HOA attorney who had a different interpretation. I said I had a copy of that opinion available if the community wanted to review it. There was a murmur in the room. Linda said the board's legal opinion was clear, and she was confident in its accuracy. I said I appreciated that, and I thought it was exactly the kind of question the community should have full information about, so they could draw their own conclusions. I distributed copies of my attorney's opinion. People read it. There were more murmurs. We moved through the agenda. Section 4, subsection C, I presented a specific analysis of how the standard had been applied inconsistently across 12 properties over the past 2 years. I had the citations and dates for each. I had photographs. I did not accuse anyone of anything. I presented the data and said the community might want to discuss whether the current interpretation was serving its intended purpose. By the time we got to the 5th seat election, there was an energy in the room that had not been there at the start. People were leaning forward. People were talking to the people next to them. The passivity that Linda's management style had cultivated over 9 years was thawing in real time. 3 people nominated themselves for the 5th seat. Linda offered to manage the election process. I said the bylaws specified that election administration should be handled by an independent party in the event of a board vacancy, and I proposed that we use the petition signatories to count the ballots. There was general agreement on this. Linda said that was acceptable. The vote was conducted. I came in first. I was the new 5th member of the Sycamore Glen HOA board. Linda thanked everyone for attending. She said it had been a productive community conversation. She said she looked forward to working with the new board member. She said it all very smoothly. She was very professional. I said I was looking forward to it too. The next board meeting was January. I arrived 5 minutes early. Gerald Marsh was already there. He said congratulations on the election. He said he meant it. He said he thought I had done something impressive. I said I had just followed the process that was in the governing documents. He looked at me for a moment. He said that's exactly what made it impressive. He said most people don't read the governing documents. I said, I know. I said that's how certain things had been able to happen for a long time. He was quiet. Then he said, Linda runs a tight ship. I said, I know. He said she also genuinely cares about the neighborhood. I said I believe that. I said I thought we all did. I said I hoped we could find a way to care about it together. He said he thought that was possible. He said he was glad I was on the board. Linda arrived at exactly 7. She called the meeting to order. She ran through the agenda with the same practiced efficiency she always brought to board meetings. There was a moment early in the meeting when she referenced the Section 4 interpretation, and I said, I thought we should add a discussion of the interpretation guidelines to next month's agenda, given the conversation at the special meeting. She paused. She said that was reasonable. She added it to the agenda. It was a small thing, but it was a different kind of meeting than the ones that had come before. I have been on the board for 8 months now. Things are not entirely different. Linda is still Linda. She still runs a tight ship, and she still cares very much about the visible standards of the community, and she still has opinions about everything that happens within visual range of her property. That is not going to change, and I have stopped expecting it to change. What has changed is the room. The room has 5 people in it now instead of 4, and one of those people is me, and I read every document before I arrive, and I ask questions when things are not clear. And I make notes, and I represent the homeowners who elected me to the seat. The vacant seat is no longer vacant. The election process has been clarified in writing and made less burdensome. We have updated the Section 4 interpretation to include specific examples of what is and is not a visual standards violation. The missing financial records are now fully on file, and the records procedures have been updated to prevent a future gap. Linda's term limits are still technically unresolved. The 2 legal opinions have not been reconciled. But at the last meeting, I proposed that we bring the question to the full community for a non-binding advisory vote, and Linda said she would consider it. That was not a yes. It was also not a no from a person who had not said anything but no for 9 years. Rosa came to the last board meeting. She sat in the 3rd row. After the meeting, she found me in the parking lot. She said she was proud of me. I said I hadn't done anything she couldn't have done. She said that was technically true, but she said I had done it and she hadn't, and there was a difference. I said Chester would have liked you. She said, who is Chester? I said my grandfather. She said, tell me about him. I said he built a contracting business for 40 years, and he left me the money for the down payment on my house. And he always said the most dangerous people were the ones who had made a small amount of power the organizing principle of their entire identity. Rosa said, that sounds like Linda. I said I thought that too when he said it, but I had also come to think it was more specific than that. I said I thought the dangerous thing wasn't the power itself. I said I thought the dangerous thing was mistaking the power for the thing that made you worthwhile. Rosa said, is that what Linda did? I said I didn't know. I said I thought she had started wanting a good neighborhood, and had somewhere along the way confused the enforcement, the rules with the neighborhood itself. I said I thought the rules were supposed to be in service of something. I said when they become the thing themselves, you have lost the point. Rosa said, "You sound like you've been thinking about this for a while." I said I had. I said I'd been thinking about it since 11 in the morning on the first Saturday in June when I nearly stepped on a violation notice while carrying a lamp into my new house. Rosa laughed. I laughed. The parking lot was cold, and the Sycamore Glen holiday lights were on in the oak trees that lined the entrance, and it was a genuinely pretty neighborhood when you were standing in it at 9 at night in December, feeling like something had shifted. Not everything. Not Linda, not the bylaws or the bureaucracy or the specific weight of navigating a community governance structure that had been optimized over 9 years to resist change. But something had shifted. The room had a different composition. The process had been used by the people it was designed to serve. The community had shown up in December when they were needed, and that showing up had mattered. Chester would have said the load-bearing wall is still there. He would have said, "I told you not to knock it over." He would have said you worked around it and now you're one of the other walls and the building is better for it. I think he would have been right. He usually was. 2 weeks ago, I got a notice. I am not going to pretend that did not produce a specific feeling in my chest. One, have been on this board for 8 months. I've attended every meeting. I've read every document. I've worked in good faith with every board member, including the one who has cited me more than once. And I got a notice. The notice said that a planter on my front porch was visible from the street and contained a plant variety not on the approved decorative plant list for exterior containers. The plant was a rosemary bush. It had been on my front porch for 6 months. Nobody had said anything about it. I had bought it at a farmer's market in September because I liked the way it looked and the way it smelled when I brushed against it coming in and out the front door. I stood on my porch reading the notice, and I thought about the first notice and the lamp and the moving truck. I thought about 47 pages of governing documents highlighted in color-coded tabs. I thought about the special meeting and 51 homeowners in the common room leaning forward. I thought about Rosa in the 3rd row last month. Then I went inside and I looked up the approved decorative plant list for exterior containers. It was last updated 6 years ago. It did not mention rosemary. This was because when it was written, nobody on the committee had thought to include culinary herbs in the exterior decoration section. I brought an amendment to the next board meeting. I proposed that the approved plant list be updated to include common culinary herbs as approved plants for exterior container decoration. I said the list had not been updated in 6 years and did not reflect current landscaping practices, and that I thought an update was overdue. Gerald said it seemed reasonable. Diane said she had been meaning to bring something similar up. Arthur looked at me from the end of the table and then looked at Linda. Linda said she would need to review the amendment language before taking a vote. I said, of course. I said I would have the language to her by Friday. She looked at me for a moment. That same look from the coffee table in October. Calculating the distance between where she was and where she needed to be. And then she said that was fine. The amendment passed at the following meeting, 3-2. Gerald voted with Linda. Diane and Arthur voted with me. I broke the tie. The rosemary is still on my front porch. It smells extraordinary in the morning when I open the door for my run. I brush against it every time I come and go, and every time I do, I think about Chester and load-bearing walls, and the specific satisfaction of using the process that exists to do what the process was designed to do. My name is Nora Bellamy. I am 28 years old. I have red hair and blue eyes and pale skin, and a rosemary plant on my front porch that is now fully compliant with Sycamore Glen community standards. I got a notice on my first morning. I joined the board. That is the whole story. That is all of it. That is everything. I want to tell you about Chester because he deserves more than a passing reference. Chester Bellamy grew up in Appalachia in a house without running water until he was 12 years old. He left at 17 with $40 and a trade school acceptance letter, and he spent the next 4 decades building a contracting business in Cincinnati that at its peak employed 63 people, and which he ran with the specific combination of fairness and stubbornness that made his employees stay and his clients return. He was not a sentimental man. He did not make speeches. He did not post things on the wall about values or teamwork. He said what he thought directly, and he expected you to say what you thought directly, and if you disagreed, he would tell you why you were wrong. And if you could tell him why he was wrong, he would revise his position. He had revised his position many times over 81 years, and he considered that a sign of health rather than weakness. He died when I was 23. He left me a sum of money that he had been accumulating specifically for this purpose for the last decade of his life. My mother called me when the will was read, and she was crying, and she said, "Chester left most of it to you," and I said, "I know he told me." She said, "He told you." I said he told me when I was 19 that he was putting money away for my house, and I should not be silly about where I bought it, and I should read the documents before I signed anything. My mother said he loved you very much. I said, "I know." I said, "I loved him very much too." I thought about Chester the day I submitted the petition. I thought about him standing at a job site in Cincinnati in 1987, looking at a building whose structural engineer had made a calculation error and figuring out how to complete the project without redoing work that was already done. He had a gift for working within constraints. He never wished the constraints were different. He just found the path through them. He would have found the path through Sycamore Glen in about 3 months. He would have had Linda's number from the first conversation, and he would have gone to the records and the meetings, and he would have been on the board before the end of the year. He would not have been dramatic about it. He would have just done it. I did it in about 15 months, which is slower than Chester would have done it, but I was also 27 when I moved in, and Chester had been navigating situations like this for 40 years by the time I was born. I think I did reasonably well. He would say I was too modest. He would say reasonably well was underselling it. Then he would tell me what I had done wrong and how I could have done it better. Then he would tell me to stop standing around and get back to work. I miss him all the time. I miss him particularly when I am in situations that require the exact combination of patience and method and willingness to use the process that exists rather than wishing for a better one, which is most of the situations in my life now. He was a good teacher. He didn't know he was teaching. He was just being himself, and I was paying attention. The thing I want to tell you about the special meeting that I did not tell you at the time is what happened after. After the meeting ended and people were filing out, Linda found me near the door. She said she wanted a moment. I said, of course. People flowed around us in both directions, neighbors I had talked to at their doors over the past 6 weeks. People who were smiling in a way that felt different from how they had smiled in October when I first knocked. Linda said she had underestimated me. She said it directly. No preamble. I said I wasn't sure what she had estimated me at initially, so I couldn't say whether she had underestimated me or not. She looked at me for a moment. She said that was a careful answer. I said I tried to be careful. She said she had run this community for 9 years, and she had done things in that time that she was proud of. She said the neighborhood was better than when she started. She said the property values were higher, and the common areas were maintained, and the community events were well attended. She said she had not done all of that by being careless. I said I believed all of that was true, and I meant it. I said I had moved to Sycamore Glen because it was a well-maintained community, and the quality of the neighborhood was clearly the result of sustained effort, and I had appreciated that when I was searching for a house. I said I did not think everything had been done wrong. She said, then what did I think had been done wrong? I thought for a moment about how to say it accurately. Then I said I thought the mechanism had become the goal. I said I thought at some point the enforcement of standards had stopped being in service of the community and had become its own end. I said I thought that was the thing that had made people feel the way they felt. She was quiet. She looked past me at the people still in the common room talking to each other. Some of them were exchanging phone numbers. A few were laughing at something. It was the most social I had ever seen Sycamore Glen residents in a common space. She said, "What do you want?" I said I wanted a neighborhood where people felt like they were part of something rather than subject to something. She said that was idealistic. I said maybe. I said I thought it was achievable. She said I was very young. I said I was. She said she hoped I still thought it was achievable in 9 years. I said I was going to try to make sure it was. She walked away. She said good night. I said good night. She was not warm, and she was not cold. She was Linda. That was probably going to stay true. I thought that was okay. I did not need Linda to be different. I needed the board to function and the community to be represented and the governing documents to be applied consistently and accountably. None of that required Linda to change her fundamental character. It just required a different composition in the room when decisions were made. The room had a different composition now. Rosa and I have a standing Sunday morning run now. We run the neighborhood loop twice, and then we sit on my front porch with coffee and we talk. Sometimes about the HOA, sometimes about our jobs, sometimes about our families or things we are reading or problems we are working through. She asked me once whether I thought I would still be in Sycamore Glen in 10 years. I said I thought so. She said the house or the board. I said both, probably. She said she was glad I had moved in. I said me too. She said even with the notices. I said especially with the notices. She said that was perverse. I said it was also true. The notices had made me read the governing documents. The governing documents had made me understand the process. The process had made me useful in a way I had not expected to be useful when I moved in with a lamp and a coffee maker still in a box. I had come to Sycamore Glen looking for a quiet place to work and a neighborhood that felt safe when I ran in the mornings. I had found those things and also something else, a problem that fit my specific combination of skills, a community that needed the kind of attention I was capable of giving. Chester would say that was not a coincidence. He would say, you end up in the situations you are equipped for if you pay attention. He would say, most people do not pay attention. He would say, that was their loss, and occasionally your advantage. I said once that it didn't feel like an advantage to get a violation notice on my first morning. He would have said that the violation notice was not what I thought it was. He would have said it was the neighborhood showing me what it needed. He would have said the question was whether I was going to be the kind of person who responded or the kind who moved away. I responded, I am not moving away. The rosemary's on the front porch, and the board meets on the last Tuesday of the month, and Rosa and I run the loop on Sunday. Mornings and the oak trees at the entrance have lights in them in December that are genuinely beautiful when you are standing in the parking lot at 9 at night, feeling like something has shifted. I want to tell you one more thing about Linda. Last month, she knocked on my door on a Saturday morning. I was not expecting her. She was carrying a container of something. She said her sister had sent too many tomatoes from her garden, and she had made a sauce, and there was more than she needed, and she thought I might want some. She handed it to me, and she said it froze well if I couldn't use it right away. I said thank you. I said that was very kind. She said it was just sauce. She started to leave. Then she turned around, and she said, I looked at the rosemary amendment language you sent. She said it was well drafted. She said she would have written it differently, but she thought it was solid. I said I appreciated that. She said, I still think the plant list update process should have been more comprehensive rather than a single amendment. I said I agreed, and I was planning to bring a broader update to the full list in the spring. She said she would review the draft when I had it. I said I would send it her way. She left. I stood on my porch with a container of homemade tomato sauce, and I thought about 9 years of notices and a special meeting and 51 homeowners in December, and a rosemary plant that was now board approved, and a woman who had just brought me sauce from her sister's garden. I thought about Chester and load-bearing walls. Thought about how the goal was never to knock the wall over. The goal was always for the building to stand. Different walls, better supported, more evenly distributed weight. The building was standing, the distribution was more even. The tomato sauce was in my refrigerator. That was enough for a Saturday in August. That was quite a lot, actually. My name is Nora Bellamy. I am 28 years old. I moved to Sycamore Glen on a Saturday in June, and I got a notice before I finished unpacking the first box. I read 47 pages of governing documents with color-coded tabs. I knocked on doors. I called a special meeting. I joined the board. I passed an amendment about rosemary. The neighborhood is still what it is. I am still what I am. We are working on both. Chester would say that's the job. He would say the job is never done. He would say get back to work. I'm back to work. That is the whole story. That is everything. I want to tell you about the door knocking because I think it was the most important part of what happened, and I have not described it well enough. Going door to door in Sycamore Glen was not like going door to door anywhere else I had been. This was a neighborhood where people had been conditioned over 9 years to keep their heads down. They had learned that engagement with community governance led to consequences. They had made a rational calculation that the cost of involvement exceeded the benefit, and they had adjusted their behavior accordingly. They were not wrong to have made that calculation. The calculation was based on accurate information. Linda had made the cost of involvement genuinely high. The people who had tried to push back had found themselves the targets of more aggressive enforcement. The word had spread quietly through the neighborhood the way things spread through neighborhoods, through conversations at mailboxes and over back fences, and in the parking lot after the elementary school pickup. Sycamore Glen homeowners knew the deal even if they had never said it aloud. When I knocked on the first door, I did not say anything about Linda. I did not say anything about the board. I said I was your neighbor at 14 Sycamore Drive, and I was trying to understand the community better, and I was wondering if you had a few minutes to talk. Most people said yes. Not because I was particularly charming, although I hope I was reasonably pleasant, but because I was a real person at their door, and real people at doors are harder to dismiss than emails or flyers or petitions you find under the door. There is something about a physical presence that creates a different kind of obligation to engage. I listened more than I talked. This was a deliberate choice and also genuinely easy, because what people had to say was interesting. They had specific frustrations. They had specific memories. They had accumulated years of experiences that they had not had a place to put. I gave them a place to put them. I wrote things down. I asked follow-up questions. I said I heard you, and I meant it. The 10th door I knocked on was a man named Walter, who had lived in Sycamore Glen for 14 years. He opened the door with the expression of someone who was prepared to refuse whatever I was selling. When I said I was his neighbor on Sycamore Drive, his expression did not change. When I said I was trying to understand the community, he said, "What do you want?" I said I wanted to know what he thought had gone wrong. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he stepped back from the door and he said, "Come in." We talked for an hour and a half. Walter had been cited more times than any other homeowner in the neighborhood. Some of the citations had been for real violations, and some had been for things that were genuinely ambiguous. He had initially tried to push back. He had sent a letter questioning the interpretation of a specific standard. The letter had been acknowledged and the violation had been upheld, and 2 weeks later he had received 3 additional notices for things that had not previously been cited. He had not pushed back again. He had paid the fines. He had made the required changes. He had continued to live in the neighborhood because his wife loved it, and his kids had grown up there, and selling would have felt like losing. He had decided that tolerating was the price of staying, and he had paid it for 12 years. He said to me, "What are you going to do about it?" I said I was going to call a special meeting and give the community the opportunity to address some specific governance questions and open the 5th board seat for election. He said that had been tried before. I said I knew. I said I thought the previous attempts had been individual rather than collective, and that there was a difference. He said he had heard that before too. I said I was sure he had. I said I understood why he didn't believe it would work. I said I was asking anyway. He said he would think about it. I left him my contact information, and I left a copy of the relevant bylaw sections, and I said I hoped he would sign the petition, but that I understood if he didn't. He signed it 2 days later. He was at the special meeting. He sat in the front row. After the meeting, he found me in the parking lot. He said he had not sat in the front row of a community meeting in 12 years. He said it felt different. I said how. He said it felt like the room was his room too. He said it had not felt that way in a long time. I said that was the point. He said I know. He said thank you. The day after I was elected to the board, I had a phone call with the civil engineering firm I worked for. My supervisor wanted to know how things were going in Virginia. I told her things were going well. I told her about the board. She was quiet for a moment, and then she laughed. She said she should have known. I said, "What should you have known?" She said that I would find a structural problem to solve within the first year. I said it was the governing documents. She said, "I know what you mean." She said I did not have to explain myself to her. She said, "Was the structure sound?" I said the structure was sound. The governing documents were actually well written, and the legal framework was solid. I said the implementation had drifted from the design intent over time. She said, "What was the design intent?" I said a community that maintained standards while being governed by and for the homeowners who lived in it. She said, "And the drift?" I said authority had concentrated in a single point over time. I said single point concentration creates fragility. She said yes. She said I already know about that. She said the solution. I said distributed load, more points of support, better redundancies. She said good. She said she was glad I was fixing it. I said I was not fixing it, exactly. I said I was redistributing the load. She said, "What was the difference?" I said fixing implies it was broken. I said it was not broken. It was out of balance. It had accumulated in one direction over time. I said the governing documents had the structure for rebalancing built in. I said I had used the structure. She said that was a distinction she approved of. She said I would make a good engineer if I did not spend all my time on HOA boards. I said I was not spending all my time. I said I had a meeting once a month and I read documents on evenings when I would otherwise be watching television. She said she supposed that was manageable. She said, good luck with the roof structure. I said there was no roof structure in question. She said there was always a roof structure in question. She said I would find it eventually. She was probably right. She usually was. In that way, she reminded me of Chester. I want to tell you about the neighborhood in the morning because I described it mostly in terms of conflict, and it is more than that. I run in the mornings. I have run in the mornings since college. 6 in the morning before work, when the neighborhood is mostly quiet and the light is the particular quality it has before the day gets busy. I run the Sycamore Glen Loop twice, which is approximately 4 miles. I have been running it for over a year now, and I know every part of it. I know where the Hendersons on Birchwood always have their porch light on, even in summer. I know that the yellow lab that lives at the corner of Maple and Sycamore will bark if I come around the corner fast, but will not if I slow, to a walk 30 yards out. I know that the 3 oak trees at the entrance are older than the neighborhood by about 40 years, and that their root systems have been slowly lifting the decorative brick edging on the right side of the entrance since approximately 2019, based on the progression I have tracked on my morning runs. I raised the root issue at the last board meeting. Gerald said he had not noticed it. I said I ran by it twice every morning. He said that explained it. I said I would put together a cost estimate for a root barrier installation and a brickwork repair. He said that would be helpful. Linda said it should have been addressed years ago. I said yes, probably. I said we would address it now. These are the ordinary things. The things the community needs that have nothing to do with power and everything to do with oak trees and brick edging and rain gutters and the specific maintenance that a neighborhood requires to remain what it is supposed to be. This is what the HOA was designed for, not the violation notices and the paint palette enforcement and the grass measurement. Those things are the mechanisms. They are supposed to serve the maintenance. When they become the point themselves, the structure has inverted and the neighborhood suffers. The oak trees are what they are regardless of how the board is run. They have been there for 60 years, and they will be there for 60 more if they are attended to. The brick edging is lifting because the roots are doing what roots do, which is grow toward water and light without regard for the decorative choices of the humans above them. I find that comforting. The trees do not know about the board meeting. They are just trees. They will outlast every conflict that has ever happened in this neighborhood and every conflict that is yet to happen. They are the load-bearing elements that nobody argues about. I run past them every morning. I am glad they are there. The rosemary is still on my front porch. It has gotten larger since September. Rosemary does that when it is happy. This particular plant appears to be happy. It has the morning sun it needs, and I water it on a schedule, and it smells exactly the way I hoped it would when I brush against it coming in and out. I was asked at last month's board meeting whether I wanted to revisit the violation that had prompted the plant list amendment now that the amendment had passed. I said no. I said the violation was historical record, and I thought it was useful for it to exist in the record exactly as it was. I said the amendment addressed the underlying issue, and that was sufficient. Linda said she noted my preference. I said thank you. The violation notice is in a folder in my home office. I have kept all of them. The first one about the moving truck, the one about the porch light bulb, the one about the grass, the one about the rosemary. They are in order by date. They are evidence of nothing sinister and everything ordinary. They are the record of a woman who moved into a neighborhood and got notices, and read the governing documents and joined the board. Chester would say, keep your records. He would say records are the memory that does not get revised by what you wish had happened. He would say, the day you think you do not need to keep records anymore is the day you should start keeping them more carefully. I keep the records. My name is Nora Bellamy. I am 28 years old. I have red hair and blue eyes and pale skin and a rosemary plant on my front porch and violation notices. In a folder in my home office and a seat on the Sycamore Glen HOA board, I ran the loop this morning at 6. The oak trees at the entrance were exactly where they have always been. The brick edging on the right side is still lifting. The repair estimate is on Linda's desk for review. The building is standing. The load is more evenly distributed. Chester would say that's the job. I agree with Chester. That is the whole story. That is everything. That is all of it. There is one thing I have not talked about yet, and it belongs in this telling. The night before the special meeting, I could not sleep. I had done everything I could do. The petition was submitted. The 23 signatures were on file. Certified mail tracking showed delivery. The date was set. The agenda was distributed. Rosa and I had knocked on every door we intended to knock on. The people who were going to come were going to come. There was nothing left to do, and I could not sleep. I got up at 2 in the morning and I made tea and I sat at my kitchen table and I thought about what would happen if it didn't work. If people didn't show up. If Linda had a response prepared for every agenda item that closed every door before it could be opened. If I had read the process correctly, but the process turned out to be less powerful than I had believed. I thought about Chester, about what he would say. I thought specifically about the time I was 17 and I had a summer job at his contracting company doing site measurements, and I had made an error in a measurement that cost the project a week and several $1,000s in rework. I had come to his office expecting to be fired. He had looked at me across his desk and he had said, "Tell me exactly what happened." I told him exactly what happened. He listened. He said, "Where did the error occur?" I pointed to the step in the process. He said, "What would you do differently?" I said what I would do differently. He said, "And if the same situation presented itself again tomorrow?" I said how I would handle it. He said, "Good." He said, "Make the correction." He said, "Get back to work." He did not fire me. He did not tell me it was fine. He did not say it wasn't a big deal. He acknowledged the error and asked me to understand it and corrected the course and moved forward. That was his whole method. That was everything he knew about problems. Name it, understand it, correct the course, move forward. Do not stay in the error longer than is necessary to learn what the error can teach you. I sat at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning the night before the special meeting, and I thought about what I would do if it did not work. I thought about it specifically. I named the scenarios. I thought about what I would learn from each one and what I would do differently and what the next step would be. And then I went back to bed. Because there was nothing left to do until morning, and the morning was coming whether I slept or not. I slept. I ran my loop at 6. I ate breakfast. I went to work. I did my regular job for the day because the day required it, and there was nothing more to do about the meeting until 7 in the evening. At 6:50, I walked across the neighborhood to the common room. The parking lot was already filling up. There were people I had talked to at their doors, and people I had not talked to. There were people Rosa had talked to. There were people who had heard from other people and come anyway. 51 people. I did not count them that night. I learned the number later from the attendance sheet. Standing in the room, it was just the room being full in a way it had not been full before. Chester would have arrived at 6:45 and sat in the back row and not said anything and watched and known everything there. Was to know about what was happening by 7:15. He would have understood the room. He would have seen Linda's face when she walked in, and he would have known what it meant. I am getting better at reading rooms. I am 28. Chester had 60 years of practice on me. I have time. My name is Nora Bellamy. I am 28 years old. I have red hair and blue eyes, and a seat on the Sycamore Glen HOA board, and a rosemary plant on my front porch, and a folder of violation notices in my home office, and a grandfather named Chester who built a contracting business for 40 years and taught me everything I know about load-bearing walls. The building is standing. The roots are lifting the brick edging on the right side of the entrance. The repair estimate is on Linda's desk. Chester would say that's the job. I am back to work. That is everything. That is the whole story.